In today's video, we have all the latest NHL trade talk heading to the deadline. Today, we're looking at teams like the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Boston Bruins, the Seattle Kraken, New York Rangers, and the Vancouver Canucks. According to Elliot Friedman, just about everybody is on the table determining what their trade value is. Plus, we also have some signings, injury updates, news from the NHL waiver wire, and the Blackhawks appear to be ready to announce their new general manager. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of NHL news and rumors to discuss here today. First up, we have a couple of quick items, including a signing with the New York Rangers. They've extended Johnny Brzezzinski to a 2-year contract extension. So certainly a 2-year two-way deal is believed for him to remain with the Rangers organization. And another signing as well, which is also connected to the NHL waiver wire. The Florida Panthers have signed 28-year-old Finnish defenseman Petteri Lindbom. Now, of course, he was playing with York Rangers in the KHL, but of course, since their season is now over, his contract was expiring, so he's decided to make the jump to North America and is now signed with the Florida Panthers. So because he's coming over from Europe, he does require NHL waivers to be put on the Panthers roster. So even though the Panthers have officially signed him, he still has to go through that and could be claimed by another team before he can officially make it on to the Florida Panther roster. Now, the other news on the waivers today as well include Edmonton Oilers forward Brendan Perlini on waivers. So we'll find out at 2 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow if either Lindbom or Perlini will have a new home or if they will be able to be assigned or added in the case of Lindbom to the NHL roster of the Florida Panthers. Now, as I mentioned, some injury updates as well. The Edmonton Oilers have officially moved Chris Russell to long-term injury reserve. So he's obviously going to be with that going to have to be out for about a month or 10 games, I believe, roughly. So we'll see when he makes his return for Edmonton. And in the case of San Jose Sharks defenseman Muriel Ferrero, he's going to, they haven't placed him on long-term injury reserve, but he basically could be. He's going to be out for about 6 to 8 weeks, which essentially basically ends his season, but he ended up having to have a surgery due to a break in his fibula. So certainly not a good story there for Ferrero. Certainly having a solid year for the Sharks and has slowly become a pretty important piece for them there on the back end. Now, as I mentioned as well, the Chicago Blackhawks appear set to name their new general manager. The search, as I mentioned a few days ago, is over. The final candidates were narrowed down to 3, and their new GM, according to Frank Saravalli of DailyFaceoff.com, is expected to be Kyle Davidson, the interim GM right now, so no change. So we've gone through a major big process, all kinds of interviews that they've made a big fuss about, all to keep with Davidson, which is certainly understandable. A lot of people felt he had the edge going in. They did interview a lot of, I guess you could say, outside-of-the-box candidates, a variety of different people with different backgrounds, including an executive from the world of baseball, which was certainly something different that you don't normally see. But Davidson, who's been on the job since the ousting of Stan Bowman earlier this season, will remain the full-time GM in effect. Clearly, they seem to have a lot of confidence in him from the get-go. Understandable why they would only give him the interim tag to start with. He hasn't really made a whole lot of moves or signings since he's been there. It's only been, very limited amount of stuff to happen with the Blackhawks, but this trade deadline for them could be a pretty significant time to start reshaping this team for the future. They've got a lot of work to do on the ice and off the ice to start reshaping the future of this franchise. Certainly Davidson has some big decisions to make and a big job to do, so we'll see where things go as he approaches his first NHL trade deadline. Now, speaking of the NHL trade deadline, let's take a look at the latest rumblings and rumors from around the NHL. There's certainly some talk about the New York Rangers. We know they've been very interested or rumored to be looking at a variety of players in the form of a top 6 forward. We've talked about their link to the Vancouver Canucks, maybe bringing back JT Miller, who's a former Ranger. We've had rumors about several other players that could fit that bill as well. But one player that looks like he might be primed to be included in a trade whenever that does go down would be youngster Philip Hedl. Now, Hedl's been, I guess, of a healthy scratch the last 2-3 games now, and a lot of people are very confused why Gallant continues to play a guy like Greg McKegg, for example, over Hedl, even on times when they had some struggle scoring. They continue to leave Hedl out of the lineup, and there are many wondering if a trade is being worked on. Maybe a deal is getting close, and they want to leave him out of the lineup in case he gets hurt or something. That's certainly something you do see sometimes. Sometimes it's made public, and a lot of times it isn't. But certainly look at a guy like Hedel. We know that the former first-round pick and prospect Vitaly Kravtsov was interested in a trade. It's quite possible they can move Alex Georgiev, although that's not a given. But we've certainly seen how he's played lately compared to Igor Shesterkin. Certainly wouldn't be a shocker if they did trade Georgiev and try to find a way to upgrade that backup spot. But at the same time, the way he's played is going to hurt his value too, so I don't know how they're going to be able to do that. But there are some teams out there that are pretty hard up for goaltending, so even a guy that hasn't been having a great season, but in the past has been a little bit better, still might get a decent look from other clubs. It's difficult to say, but the Hedel healthy scratches has certainly got people talking and thinking that maybe they're close to landing a big deal and he might be involved. So only time will tell if he gets back in the lineup here shortly. Maybe the rumor will turn out to be false, but then again, it wouldn't be shocking if it was something that comes to be. Regardless of when they make a deal, I fully expect the Rangers to make some sort of a big splash going into the playoffs. And Hedel was, in my opinion, very likely to be included. It wouldn't, like I said, Georgiev's another possibility. It wouldn't even rule out like a guy like Nils Lundqvist, for example, maybe being an option as well. Zach Jones. They have a lot of young players. Kravtsov to be included. There's lots that they can do there. They have very attractive options for teams looking to move some high-quality players. So we'll see what they end up doing here. Now, the Seattle Kraken are certainly reportedly interested in a few guys with a contract term, or if they're still under control, like an RFA, for example. We know the Kraken are likely going to be quite busy going to their first trade deadline. They have a lot of players on expiring contracts, mostly UFAs with a couple RFAs in there. And the UFAs are not all going to be traded because you do have to keep some players on your roster, but there's a lot of them that have a decent chance to get moved. There's no doubt, especially when you look at like Mark Giordano, for example, Calle Jarnkrok's another one, Marcus Johansson. Like there's still more than a handful that could draw a variety of interest. There's some talk about Jared McCann. I'm not entirely convinced he goes because he still has one more year as being a restricted free agent. So they could choose to pay him and get him signed. He's been their top offensive player, so it makes sense that he might want to stick around. But certainly looking at other players like Jake DeBrusk apparently is a player who's interested to the Kraken. Now, of course, the Seattle Kraken have a variety of pieces there that might be of interest to the Boston Bruins. I know that they're likely looking for help on the blue line. They might be looking for help at the center position. So depending on what they decide to do, there's a variety of pieces there in Seattle that could certainly intrigue them. But like I said, I've seen for a while now off and on that the Kraken were reportedly interested in Jake DeBrusk, so we'll see where things go. No guarantees that deal gets done, but another player for the Kraken, and even you could throw the Coyotes in the mix as well, would be Josh Bailey of the Islanders, who's found himself a healthy scratch here recently. Certainly the longtime Islanders had a pretty decent career, but the Islanders have had their ups and downs, obviously, all season long. Obviously, their game, the last one here against the Anaheim Ducks, was a real solid effort, shut out by Sorokin, which was great to see. Bailey did get back in the lineup there due to injury to Matt Barzal, but certainly, Bailey is a guy who has been rumored to be on the move by the Islanders, who need to find some cap flexibility here. We're looking at probably Bailey, Varlamov, Clutterbuck, maybe a guy like Andy Green or Chera if there's interest, or you're most likely candidates to be moved by the Islanders ahead of the deadline as they try to find themselves the most cap flexibility they can find to address their needs in the offseason. I personally really do think the Islanders are a team who could kind of retool in the offseason and bounce back next year, but they do need to get younger, they need to get a little bit faster, and they need to add some skilled players to have a more offensively gifted lineup. The team they have has looked a little bit older and slower this year, and it's become more apparent that they need to make some changes in that regard, and moving out a guy like Bailey would be a long way to do that. I know he's a long-time player, a fan favorite to a degree, might not go well with some fans, but it's time that they need to find a way to move on here. A team like Seattle with lots of cap space would be a team that would be, likely to do that. They might have to throw in an extra draft pick or something as an incentive. Or a team like Arizona, as I mentioned, the Coyotes are likely going to have some trouble filling out their roster next year with the move to ASU. As I reported yesterday, a lot of players are not happy about going to a college, rink and playing in front of 5,000 fans instead of a full regular NHL arena. They have a ton of players on expiring contracts. I think they only have 6 or 7 guys under contract for next year, and that includes Jacob Chychrun, which is likely going to be moved. So they're going to want to be acquiring players at the deadline here and into the early part of the offseason players with term, guys who are under contract that they know are going to be sticking around for a couple of years. So guys like Bailey who need to move on from their team, or that the other team needs to move on from, I should say, is a prime landing spot for them moving forward. So we'll see. Something else to keep an eye on that front. The Boston Bruins, of course, as we talked about with Jake DeBrusk, possibly heading to Seattle. If they do another deal, there is rumor that they also have some interest in Nick Leddy in Detroit. And of course, he's also a pending unrestricted free agent. Obviously has a lot of experience from his time in Chicago as well as Long Island. Could be a very serviceable left pair defenseman that could service their needs that they're looking for. I mean, they might want something a little higher end, but at the end of the day, it's going to cost you a lot. And Leddy might be a guy that might be able to get a lot cheaper as well, even though he's within their own division there. So we'll see some potential deals between Boston, maybe Seattle, maybe Detroit as well. And I said look for Seattle to be involved in a variety of players like DeBrusk, Bailey, etc. Now the Penguins are another team we know are likely going to be making a move here. Brian Burke and Ron Hextall are likely going to be fairly aggressive at the deadline, likely adding something in the form of a top 6 or top 9 forward. We know their philosophy of going forward every year when they have Crosby and Malkin playing at a high level. We know they have a lot of pending UFAs like Malkin, obviously Chris Letang, Brian Russ. It's not going to be easy to bring everybody back next year. So one player they're reportedly very open to trading should the right deal come along is defenseman Mike Matheson. Now, it's not a case that they're not happy with Matheson and they really want to move him or anything like that. I think he's played better this year for them. I think they've been reasonably happy with his play, but he has 4 more years left at $4.87 million, and that's a big contract with a lot of term. Now, it might be tough for them to move, so it may not happen anyway. But at the same time, when you're trying to re-sign Malkin and you're trying to re-sign Letang and Russ to have any shot at bringing them all back, which you'd like to do, some money does need to go out. And he's a player that they're very much open to doing that with. If it means trading Matheson now to have a better shot at keeping Letang later, that's something they're willing to do. So, for example, look to a team like the Anaheim Ducks. To me, that makes a lot of sense for a good trade partner. The player they might be looking for in Pittsburgh could be a guy like Rickard Rakell, maybe even Ryan Getzlaf. I wouldn't rule out either one of those guys being the player that comes over. And, of course, they have a lot of question marks on their blue line. They have pending UFAs in Josh Manson, Hampus Lindholm, to name a couple there. They may not be back. If they're not back, if they're not confident they're going to be able to sign them and they're on the trade block, maybe they bring in Matheson as somebody who's under contract who can fit and at the same time move on from a pending UFA, like I said, like a Rakell or Getzlaf, going the other way. Doesn't mean it's going to be exactly that kind of deal, but I could see a trade taking place between those two teams centered around that kind of concept. Now, Elliot Friedman, of course, was also talking again about the Canucks. I know the Canucks players apparently are getting quite antsy with all these trade rumors and are probably getting tired of hearing it, I'm sure, but I know he was on Vancouver media talking on the Donnie and Daly show with Don Taylor and Rick Dollywall, and certainly, he made mention that according from what he's hearing, Jim Rutherford basically has every single player outside of Pettersson, Hughes, and Demko on the table. Between Rutherford and Alvin, they're kind of basically judging the value. They're not necessarily shopping everybody. They're not going to do that. But at the same time, they're looking for cap flexibility. They're really considering making a move here. You have to think, though, that their standing position in the Pacific Division might very well cause them to wait and pause a little bit. I'm sure ownership is going to want to get into the playoffs if they can to recoup some money. Of course, all teams have been hit hard by COVID the last couple of years. They're knocking on the door to a playoff spot now after a terrible start. They've really found their way back into the mix. But if you look at their schedule leading up to the deadline, as Jeff Merrick pointed out in a recent podcast and on the radio today, they have a really good schedule going to the deadline. They can probably get themselves into the mix here so that they're kind of more, in a playoff spot by the deadline. But their schedule after the deadline is pretty brutal with a lot of really top teams that they may really struggle with. So do you want to see them go to the deadline, get themselves built up their confidence, make a big move, and then not be able to keep up with it? And at the same time here, like I said, with Vancouver, obviously, they don't want to, sell a player off and lose confidence, lose the fans, upset people, and then, maybe find their way into the playoffs anyways, right? So you don't know how things are going to go. It's hard to predict, but, you don't want to send mixed signals to your players or your fans and kind of get things going. Because Bruce Boudreau's done a masterful job since he's been back behind the bench with Vancouver. They've gotten themselves right back into the mix there, and it's hard to say, but certainly would it be Besser that goes? Is it Miller? Is it Garland? Is it Tyler Myers? It's really difficult to say what the Canucks end up doing. Like I said, at the end of the day, it seems like they're kind of evaluating everybody, not named Pettersson, Hughes, or Demko, kind of determining what they think is the best route for the future, what kind of return can they get, how can they give themselves the flexibility without sacrificing too much of the quality product that they have on the ice now that they're playing better. So it's about finding that right fit, which Rutherford and Alvin are working on now. So I don't think we're going to see anything too significant out of Vancouver, but it's certainly going to be interesting to see how they handle things if they continue to win and get themselves into a playoff spot. All these rumors might have to hold off here, and they may wait and try to find some deals at the end of the season into the summer after all. So we'll see where that goes. Let me know your thoughts on something to discuss today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.